All right, we're all good to learn about marvelous manatees.
All right, thanks for joining everybody. I'm Dr. Jim Masterson, and I am an assistant research professor up at the Harbor Branch campus of Florida Atlantic University. So we're up in Fort Pierce. We're about 100 miles north of the Boca main campus, which is about 30 or so miles north of you guys in Fort Lauderdale, correct? Okay, we are going to talk about manatees this afternoon, and a good bit of the talk is focused on the population in our six-county Indian River Lagoon region. That just happens to be where a lot of the East Coast manatees hang out, but it's information that is of relevance state wide. So everyone can see my slides there. Good. Yeah. Okay. So this is who we're talking about today. This is our Florida manatee, and we are still a few months away from Manatee Awareness Month. That happens in November every year when the weather is starting to cool off and the animals are starting to move towards their aggregation spots, towards the warm waters for the next several months. And our Florida species is a subspecies. Trichechus monatus laterastris. It's a subspecies of Trichechus monatus, and it was actually initially distinguished from a Antillean subspecies based on morphological differences. There were measurable cranial differences sufficient to class it as its own subspecies, and it can be found in brackish and marine waters all the way into entirely fresh water in Florida. One of the claims I'm sure you all have encountered is that our West Indian manatees are not Florida natives. That is most certainly false. They have been in Florida much longer than humans have. There's good representation in the fossil record, and there's good representation in the pre-Columbian Indian middens. Lots of bones that is evidence of their use by pre-Columbian peoples. These are members of order Sirenia. These are the sea cows, and we see that they arose from a terrestrial mammalian line similar to other marine mammals that reinvaded our oceans. And this happened around 50 million years ago during the Eocene, and we'll come back to the Eocene epoch here. These Order Sirenia got its name in reference to the sirens, the mermaids, and I guess you can mistake them for mermaids. They form clade Tetheria along with the extant elephants and two extinct orders of mammals, and we will come back to that relationship as well. And there's a related family, the dugongs, that actually appear in the fossil record before the trichechids. And it seems like the manatees arose from the dugongs around 34 million years ago at the end of the Eocene and into the early Oligocene. A lot of my students, they get frustrated when we bat around all of those different names for the epochs. And so I like to use this mnemonic. Pelican egg omelets make people puke. Those are the Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, and Pleistocene, and that helps you keep them straight. So the Paleocene began with the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. The Pleistocene ended just shy of 12,000 years ago with glacial retreat and another extinction event that took out a lot of the large terrestrial mammals, woolly mammoths and ground sloths and those sorts of things. So some size, some lifespan information. As newborns, these are cute little animals around a meter long, about 60 to 70 pounds at birth. And adults are much larger than that. They can be 10 feet on average. They can weigh well over 1,000 pounds. The females typically are larger than the males, and the largest specimens are over 3,000 pounds. They're very long lived. They can reach 60 years of age, and we know that based on looking at the growth rings in their ear bones. Often we use teeth to age long lived mammals. We can do that with toothed whales and with dolphins. We can cut a tooth in half and stain it and then count the rings like you're counting rings on a tree. And that doesn't work for manatees. So we have to do the same thing with one of their ear bones. They're massive, stout animals, typically light gray or brown. The calves are slightly darker when they're born. They do have hair. They are mammals, but the hair is sparse and distributed all over their body. And then they have the stiff whiskers all around their face and muzzle. They have forelimbs that are externally rounded and paddle-like, but they're a good lesson in comparative anatomy. You see the same bones in those limbs as terrestrial mammals have. There are no hind limbs externally, but you will find a vestigial pelvis in the skeletons. The lower photo there shows that vestigial pelvis in a manatee mount, and you have a nice look at the toenails on the forelimbs of that animal. The tail, it's rounded, it's horizontally flattened, and the power stroke is a vertical up and down stroke like cetaceans and unlike the lateral stroke of fishes. They have a pair of eyes that are set far apart, and rather than having eyelids to open and close their eyes, they close through a sphincter muscle that contracts. They also have got oil glands and a nictitating membrane to protect the eyes. They have built-in nose plugs, flaps that close their nostrils when they are submerged. And they do have external ear openings. They don't have any kind of a pinna, but they have a very small external pinhole ear that you can see an arrow pointing to in that lower right photograph. The upper lip of the animals is prehensile, and that's very useful for digging up the vegetation they're eating, useful for stripping leaves from stems. And the teeth, coming back to these, we call them marching molars. And this refers to the fact that the older teeth in the front of the jaw get pushed out and replaced by newer teeth. And you can see in that lower right photo how much nicer those back molars are. They're not worn down the way the ones in the front are. And that wear comes from decades of chewing a very refractory, very coarse vegetable diet. And so this is a way that these animals keep their teeth throughout their lives. Terrestrial elephants do the same thing, and sometimes this is referred to loxodont dentition. Loxodonta is the species of the African elephant, and this was one of the first hints that there might be an evolutionary relationship between elephants and mammals. Females, being mammals, they have mammary glands. Their teeth are located basically at the armpit, at the axilla of each of the forelimbs. And there's no storage sacs, so the calves have to suckle very frequently at short intervals. So if you ever see a smaller manatee look like she's going in and taking a bite of a larger animal, she's not going in for a bite, she's going in for a drink. These animals have very stout skeletons. Their bones are dense and heavy. They're very robust animals. The ribs and the long bones don't have the marrow cavities that a lot of mammals have. The lungs are elongate and they are located up against the ribs towards the back of the animal. They extend almost to the anus. They provide horizontal flotation. And if they were located more ventrally, this animal would be very prone to rollover. So that dorsal location helps keep them backside up and vent side down so they're not rolling over. They do contract their rib muscles in order to change the shape and the volume of their lungs, and that aids in buoyancy control. And the kids that I give this presentation to always giggle like the kids that they are when I tell them that they use flatulence as well in controlling their buoyancy. They have a very thin layer of blubber, so thin that it doesn't give them the thermal protection that cetaceans gain from their blubber. So that is a strategy not available to them. Rather, they rely on their digestive system that produces heat and a circulatory system that will move that heat throughout the bodies of the animals. They also don't have the large amounts of myoglobin in their bodies like deep diving mammals. This is reflected in the manatees making short, shallow dives and not being diving champions. They have a small brain compared to their body size, and unlike a lot of mammals that we associate with being intelligent, they don't have a lot of the surface folds that you'll see in a primate brain, for example. So we don't think that they're great thinkers. They're not particularly gregarious animals, and they typically will gather if they are all utilizing the same warm water refuge or maybe utilizing the same feeding resources, and they come together for mating. They do exhibit some play behaviors. You will see chasing and nuzzling and those sorts of things. They will spend a good portion of their day sleeping and resting, and they'll spend about 8 hours or so foraging during a typical day. And they typically are low speed cruisers, 3 to 6 miles an hour, but capable of making short, faster bursts. And they can hold their breath for as much as 20 minutes, but typically don't. Their dives are more like every 3 to 5 minutes. And you see variable migrations among different individuals. Some of them are more homebodies, some of them have wanderlust, but they're capable of traveling 25 miles or so in a day, and they can do that for several consecutive days if they have a destination in mind. If they're heading towards a known warm water refuge, for example. They can travel along the coast, but you'll rarely encounter them very far offshore. Of course, they're herbivores, and they're capable of consuming 10 to 20% of their body weight per day. Maybe closer to that 10% is typical. And they're eating seagrass, they're eating freshwater vascular plants. They will consume bank vegetation if it's available to them, and they can take in macroalgae as well, seaweed. And when it's available, seagrass is typically the biggest portion of their diet, and that is especially true in South Florida. In the winter, they have to make some choices because they do easily get stressed by cold. And so typically they're going to rest by day in warm waters. And then in the late afternoon, they will make foraging excursions. And typically that does expose them to cold water. So they have to make a choice between foregoing food or leaving that warmer environment. And typically warmth wins out, and they will lose out on feeding opportunities if it's too cold to partake. So they do feed in the water, but they exclude most of the water when they're swallowing. And so the contents in their stomach is on the dry side. They do have large salivary glands, typical of other big mammalian grazers, and the saliva will lubricate and begin digestion of their food. They're not ruminant animals. They're hindgut digesters. They have a very long gut passage, and it will take as much as a week for material to pass entirely through the digestive system of these animals. A little bit on reproduction. They have about a 1-to-1 sex ratio. Males can mature at 3 to 4 years, maybe younger than that. Females, they will typically become pregnant for the first time around 3 to 5 years of age. By age 7, most females have successfully calved. And being long lived, they will have multiple opportunities to reproduce during their lives. Every 2 to 3 years, a female will bear a calf, and they'll do that at least into their 30s and maybe longer. As with cetaceans, the occurrence of twins is quite low. Around 2% of live births are twin births, and they've got a pretty admirable gestation period, 12 to 14 months. So on average, it's a 13-month gestation period, but they have the advantage of the buoyancy of water to help them through that gestation. The calves, they'll be weaned in 1 to 2 years, but they typically will stay near their mothers for a few years beyond that. And breeding can occur year round, but you do see a peak in calving in the spring and in the early summer. You don't see the formation of permanent male-female bonds. Instead, you see mating herds, copulation that involves a female in estrus that is being courted by several bulls. You will see juvenile males, young adult males attempting to access females, but they are usually dominated by the larger bull males. And females will often tire of all that courtship, and they will beach themselves to escape amorous males. You'll see in the news every once in a while, people will call about a stranded manatee, and FWC will come out and say, well, she's stranded by choice because she's getting away from all of those males. The mortality rates for newborns are on the high side. As much as half of the carcasses that were recovered during that 25-year stretch from 76 to 91 were animals that were 2 or younger. But after that initial perinatal bottleneck, the survival rates will increase. And then from age 4 into adulthood, there's about a 90% annual survival rate for those adults. So some more history. Florida, we're at the northern limit of their year-round range. The historic range of these animals is not known for certain, but we know that our population now is a few relict groups compared to what it was historically, largely due to human exploitation. So some nice archival images showing some Seminoles using manatees for sustenance. And then that picture on the right, that's an unknown location, but the picture was found in a library in Trinidad, and it shows manatee hides that are hanging on that boat, and it shows that there was some commercial exploitation. This seems to go above and beyond the artisanal and subsistence hunting. They occur almost exclusively in the southeastern United States. You do have some reports coming from the Bahamas, and the temperatures in the Keys are certainly agreeable for manatees, but the lack of fresh water is what we typically attribute that low occurrence of manatees in the Keys to. During the warmer months, the population is going to disperse throughout coastal Florida. You'll see some animals that will range well outside of the state, as far as Virginia, and occasionally further for individual animals. They'll go west to the Gulf Coast of Texas, and they will be spread out, very diffuse population through those summer months. When the cold winter temperatures set in, the manatees, the population will contract, and you'll have all of our manatees back in peninsular Florida, and they are seeking out whatever warm water refuge they can, and that includes natural springs. It includes man-made thermal power plant outfall as well. So here's a picture of Chessie, whom you might be familiar with. Um, Chessie, back in 1994, first made news because she made it all the way up into Chesapeake Bay. And the next year, she came back. She wintered back in Florida. She came back and actually went all the way to Rhode Island in 95. And after that, reports of Chessie were fairly sporadic. Many years would go by without any news reports. And then she disappeared for quite a long time. And then in 2021, she was located, seemed very malnourished, in Lake Worth with a population of similarly malnourished animals. So there was an intervention there to try to get her back to health. And she resurfaced in 2022. They lost sight of her, I think, in April of 2022. They had been tracking her, but I don't know that she's made the news since then, or if she's even still, he is still with us. So our historic northern winter limit on the East Coast is up by us in Sebastian River. That's been extended because we do have these man-made warm water refuges that dot the coast. So they can get further north than they historically did by relying on those warm water outfalls. They'll migrate to those warmer aggregation sites when the temperatures get to around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not particularly cold, but manatees start to experience cold stress even at that relatively high temperature. And there is some site fidelity. They can return to the same refuge in successive years. Okay, so on to some population demographics. Fish and Wildlife, other authors have suggested that our Florida manatees can be divided into four different subpopulations, and those subpopulations are defined by their winter ranges. And in the summer, those diffuse populations will overlap, so there is some gene flow among those subpopulations. Our IRL population is part of the Atlantic subpopulation, and that population includes almost half of all Florida's manatees and includes all of our East Coast manatees. So a little bit on the aerial surveys, how we get the population numbers that you see published. 2019 was the last year that they were able to successfully complete the synoptic aerial survey. And this was done from late January into early February, and they got a minimum count of 5,733 manatees in Florida, divided into about 2,400 East Coast animals and about 3,300 West Coast animals. These synoptic surveys began way back in 1991. FWC coordinates them. They're conducted in the winter when those populations are concentrated at the warm water refuges. and it covers all of the known wintering habitats for the manatees. They're scheduled if only certain minimum requirements are met at the same time. And that's why we haven't had one of these surveys in a few years. The air temperatures have to be less than or equal to 49 degrees Fahrenheit near most of those aggregation sites on 3 of the 5 days prior to the survey. The water temperature has to be below that 68 Fahrenheit threshold near most of the sites. You can't have winds above 15 knots in the entire survey area, and you can't have sky conditions that are mostly cloudy or rainy in that entire survey area. So all of those conditions have to be met simultaneously. And so some years they were not able to do those synoptic surveys. 2008, 2012, 2013, they couldn't get surveys in. And then since the 2019 survey, they've not completed one of these. It's getting more and more challenging to make that air temperature minimum in a warmer and warmer Florida winter. This is what those surveys look like, and I'm sure that's kind of hard for you guys to read on the screen. But starting in 1991, there was a low total of 1,267 animals, and then you see numbers going up and down and reaching a peak in 2017 with 6,620 animals estimated in 2017. And then after 2019, they weren't able to fly these surveys. I just added this information for this talk. There is a new survey method that FWC is moving towards, and it actually is something they've been playing around with since 2011. And it's an abundance survey method that differs from the synoptic methods in a couple of key ways. It takes place over a week or more for each coast, and different coasts are surveyed in consecutive years. So one year they're going to do the East Coast, the next year they come back and do the West Coast. They schedule it for an earlier time in the year when the manatees are in Florida but still spread out. So they're not looking for that concentrated population of gray dots that they can count in the springs or around the power plants. And they don't have a predefined flight path. Instead, they rely on the computers to randomize thousands of locations that they are going to select, and then they're going to use some statistics to extrapolate the whole population. And finally, you have a pair of observers on each flight that are independently doing their counts so that a comparison can be made. So a lot of ways that the abundance method differs from the synoptic method. Like I say, they've been playing around with this since 2011, and there's been 3 of these abundance surveys completed, 2011 and 2012, 2015 and 2016, and then the most recent one was 2021, 2022. And those flights were conducted first half of December on the west coast of Florida in 2021, and then the next year late November into December on the East Coast. The estimates from those abundance surveys were on the very high side compared to even that 2017 high number for the synoptic surveys. The estimate ranged from 8,350 animals to as many as 11,730 animals. And you see the West Coast, East Coast split there. Those ranges, according to FWC, are the Bayesian credible intervals. So there's a 95% confidence among those surveyors that the real population size is between that lower and upper bound if their underlying statistical assumptions are correct. And again, these numbers are higher than the highest synoptic survey numbers ever recorded. So we maybe have been underestimating the population, or maybe we still have to have things worked out here. But I wanted to share that information with you. Um, we're going to get back to 2021, which wasn't a good year for our manatees statewide. There have been laws protecting manatees in Florida since the late 1800s. They were first listed as an endangered species in 1967 among the original listed species after the establishment of the ESA. And they get a degree of protection from the Marine Mammal Protection Act as well. In 1976, critical habitat was designated for manatees. And there was some controversy after those high numbers, that 6,600 number in 2017. Manatees were downlisted from endangered to threatened. And that was a decision that was met with some resistance. Okay, threats to our manatees include boat strikes. They're very robust animals. A lot of them survive blunt impacts, but it's hard to, come out on top of an encounter with a prop. Um, Crushing in control structures. And these numbers have come down over the last couple of decades because of sensing devices. Most of our navigational structures or our water control structures now have a sensing bumper system that will not close in on the manatees. Entanglement is an issue, as it is with other marine mammals. Culverts can trap small calves. Harmful algal blooms are becoming a more pressing issue. Cold stress is a big issue for these guys. Starvation associated with our recent loss of seagrasses throughout the lagoon and elsewhere. So again, no blubber in these guys. So any water temperatures lower than 68 degrees start to compromise the immune system of these animals. They become susceptible to infectious illness. That's chronic cold stress. And then if temperatures get below 60 Fahrenheit, you actually can see animals succumbing to that acute cold stress. So both of those are a concern. The cold stress manatees typically are also malnourished. They're emaciated. Often you'll see the white patches on their bodies where their skin is sloughing off. So they are overall very stressed in that condition. We had a record cold weather event in 2010, 2011. Those are the last years where we had prolonged cold winters. We had below average temperatures in February and March, and that led to what at the time was a record number of manatee deaths in Florida. We had a statewide unusual mortality event, or UME, that lasted just about 3 months. And the highest mortalities were seen in East Central as well as Southwestern Florida. Nearly 500 carcasses were confirmed during this period, and the majority of those animals, a confirmed cause of death was cold stress. And there was a large number where the deaths could not be confirmed, but were also likely related to cold stress. And at the time, this was an unprecedented event in terms of the range, in terms of how severe the mortalities were, in terms of that 3 month duration. In 2013, we had a significant red tide event, and that set a record for manatee mortalities at 830. And up until this time, this was our highest death total since records began. Prior to that, the cold stress event in 2010 had set that record. Leading cause of mortality was a Southwest Florida red tide, and 276 animals succumbed to that event. We had high mortality in the IRL region at the same time, but it was not a red tide related mortality event. Um, in April 2013, another UME was declared. We had increased numbers of strandings and mortalities on the east coast of Florida. So at the same time we were losing the animals in the Southwest, we're also losing animals on this coast. This happened at the same time as a bottlenose dolphin UME. And there was also a mortality event impacting our brown pelicans. And as far as I know, that pelican mortality event hasn't been fully explained. Happening at the same time as the red tide was breaking out on the West Coast. So between July 25th, 2012, June 14th, 2013, FWC had documented 250 manatee deaths in Brevard, and 111 of those were attributed to that UME. Cause of our elevated mortality still under investigation, and hypotheses include starvation, possibly lethal dietary toxicity as well. The idea there is, in the absence of the seagrass that would form the bulk of their diet, manatees might be moving on to food that will sustain them, macroalgae that can keep them going, but might have a low-level toxicity that over time might become a problem. All right. So in 2018, we had a high number of manatee mortalities reported. West Coast red tide, again, was a significant cause of mortality there. 2019, 2020, the numbers weren't quite as high. These were at the high end of what we would consider normal years. There wasn't a large cold stress event or a large red tide event. And so those are fairly typical numbers, maybe a little high, but still in the typical range. So here's a summary from 2001 to 2021. These are the death categories that FWC utilizes, and we can see a summary for the year 2023. We can see all of the counties in which manatee carcasses were recovered, and then we can see what mortality cause each of those was attributed to. And these come out monthly from FWC, and then at the end of the year, we get a summary of these things. So I'll highlight our Indian River counties that contributed to those totals. Broward, only 2 animals died in all of Broward during that year, and 3 in Miami-Dade. So here's that same summary. You see the statewide totals in blue, the IRL totals in orange, and then just Brevard, which makes up 40% of the IRL region. That's one of the main reasons why so many of those animals are recovered in Brevard. So 2021, you see a new record year, 1,101 animals were recovered. Carcasses were recovered in 2021. And 553 of those were in the IRL region. So more than half of the state totals were in the lagoon. 30% of them just occurred in Brevard County. So this stands as the highest number ever recorded in the state. Most of those deaths occurred early in the year, January, February, and March. And if we zoom in just to look at that year, we see After March, those numbers come back down, but we probably have a combination of colder temperatures and lower food resources, more starvation contributing to those totals. For the last decade, we have had an increased number of harmful algal blooms. You're familiar with those in South Florida. There's other human fingerprints on some of the things contributing to our loss of seagrass coverage in the lagoon and elsewhere. Um, as this preferred food source disappears, our manatee deaths attributable to starvation and malnourishment has gone way up. The manatees that are at those warm water refuges, they have to make that lethal choice we already talked about. They can remain in that thermal refuge, but they are foregoing those foraging hours, or they can travel to those locations and then expose themselves to thermal stress. So it is, quite a challenge. And it seems like most of the manatees will forego feeding in order to remain close to those thermal refuges during extreme cold events. So we want the seagrass to come back, either through natural recruitment or through transplanting efforts, likely a combination of both of those. But there's some things that have to happen first. We've got to figure out how to reduce the amount of nutrient pollution that enters our estuaries. And we've got to take care of a century's worth of legacy nutrients that have to be removed or otherwise sequestered so they aren't fueling those algal blooms. So that's the heavy lift. We're getting good at growing seagrass in land-based nurseries. We're getting good at outplanting that material. But if the water clarity isn't there, we probably are just spinning our wheels. So we've got to reverse those conditions so that we can successfully restore those seagrass habitats. Um, so we took an unprecedented step in 2021 and started to supplement the nutrition of manatees in Brevard County because you're not supposed to see ribs like you do on this animal here. So starting in 2021, and then they have continued last year and even and the year before with setting up a feeding station here at the Cape Canaveral Energy Center. And it's a pilot program. It flies in the face of everything we heard if we grew up in Florida, hearing managers say that you're not supposed to give those animals water, you're not supposed to feed them, you're not supposed to molest those manatees. You don't want to change their behaviors. But desperate times, desperate measures. The state has attempted these efforts. It doesn't help the manatees, down in St. Lucie and Martin County, if it's just animals up in Brevard that are being fed. But again, I think that they are, piloting this project because it is something they've never attempted before. So 2022 looked better than 2021 by quite a bit. We still were high at 802 statewide mortalities, but that was better than the 1100. You still see the preponderance of mortalities occurring January through March. 2023, the number came down again. So 555 mortalities statewide is in that normal range. And then that peak that you see in March occurred on the West Coast. That didn't occur on the East Coast, and I do believe that was also a harmful algal bloom related event. I'm winding down here. So 2023, That was below the 5 year average because that average had those really bad years, 2021, 2022 in there. And it's the lowest since the 2017 mortality totals. Leading cause of death in 2023, watercraft and natural disease. 20% of the statewide totals were, there you go, red tide in Southwest Florida is where that March peak came from. Um, so in contrast with what was happening on the Gulf Coast, we saw 81% of the Atlantic carcasses showing um, oh, it's during the UME, the starvation UME, but starvation related mortality was very low in 2023. Seagrass has not come back since 2021. So these animals are filling their bellies with material other than seagrass. I mean, there's some seagrass recovery happening, but we're still well under the coverage totals that we had in 2011 prior to our big bloom-related losses. And that is the end of my presentation. I want to invite all of you to come up and see us in person if you ever get the chance. We're in Fort Pierce, and we've got a visitor center that is open Tuesday through Saturday. You can take boat tours and campus tours out from the campus here. You can just get on our website and find that information. We have got public lectures that are monthly starting in August. So August through December, we have monthly lectures. And then in the spring, we go to a weekly lecture series for 10 weeks for our ocean science lectures. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to field any questions. And thank you very much for tuning in today. Stop share. How'd that work?
This was great. Thank you. Um,
Certainly.
Always something new to learn. So, as a wildlife hospital, we do treat native wildlife. Unfortunately, we're not permitted to do, sea turtles, manatees, and things like that. But we always, tell people if you see something wrong, we give them FWC's number at the start to see if they're able to help. And I'm hopeful maybe as we grow, we are able to kind of expand and do more just because they are awesome and they do let us know what's going on out there. We did get one comment. Is there any manatee organization that you would advise people to support and donate to continue helping with work like this?
I think the Save the Manatee Club is the best place to put that donation.
Very cool. Very cool.
We actually we do a lot of marine mammal interventions, but our folks are focused mostly on the cetaceans, and bottlenose dolphins make up the bulk of our interactions, followed by pygmy and dwarf sperm whales. We will assist with manatee rescues, but we are not the lead agency. So if a county or state agency requires assistance, they want to make use of our marine mammal ambulance, we will go out in support of that.
Very cool. Yeah, our executive director is actually one of the people that get called whenever there's a stranding down here in the port. So she'll usually take one or two of us to go out there and to help. Usually FWC will be there and we'll be able to assist in that manner. There was one other question on swimming with manatees and your thoughts on whether it was ethical or stressful, legal even.
That's a good question. And I'm a camper every Thanksgiving. I go out with my family for a week of camping. Love to go out into the springs up in Ocala. And sometimes it's really hard to stay away from the manatees because they're very curious. I do think it's worth keeping the restrictions in mind that you shouldn't be chasing the manatees. I've seen people get hauled away on camping trips, basically riding the manatees and hugging the manatees. But they can be very curious, and you'll find yourself being nuzzled by the manatees. So it's hard to always maintain that distance. And I think that it's a common sense kind of thing. You're not the one that is chasing them. You're not the one that's reaching out and grabbing them. But it's a really neat experience to be in the water with them. When I was a grad student at Florida Tech in Melbourne, we had a uh, population monitoring program where we would go out with snorkel gear and dive slates and sketch the scar patterns, like we do
Yeah.
with the bottlenose dolphin dorsal fins, and we would do that with the manatees. And that was always a great way to spend a weekend.
Very cool. That's awesome. Any last questions from the group? I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.